There is a very specific feeling that lives inside people born between 1976 and 1985, and it's hard to explain unless you've lived it. It's not nostalgia exactly, it's not resentment, it's not pride, it's something quieter, a subtle sense of being slightly out of rhythm with both the past and the present. If you were born in those years, you remember a world that no longer exists, but you also had to become an adult inside one that appeared almost overnight. You are not fully Gen X, formed entirely in analog independence, and you are not fully millennial, raised inside the architecture of the internet. You came of age in the seam between two realities, and living in a seam shapes the psyche in ways that most people never consciously examine. Do you remember when leaving the house meant disappearing? Not symbolically, but literally disappearing. There was no digital breadcrumb trail, no blue dot moving across a map, no ambient awareness of you somewhere in the network. If someone needed you, they waited. If you were gone, you were simply gone. There was something psychologically powerful about that. Being unreachable meant your identity existed within physical space only. Presence and absence were clean states. When you were somewhere, you were there. When you weren't, you weren't. That clarity shaped your nervous system. It shaped how you understand time, separation, and independence. As a child, boredom was not a problem to be solved. It was a condition of life. Long afternoons stretched without interruption. No streaming, no endless scrolling, no glowing device dissolving silence. You had to generate experience from imagination alone. Sidewalk chalk became cities. Empty lots became kingdoms. A stick could become a sword. A cardboard box could become anything. Neuroscience today would say that your default mode network was active, that your brain learned to wander, combine, invent, and simulate, but you didn't know any of that. You just knew how to fill space without external input. That ability is rarer now than most people realize. You also learned how to wait. You waited for your favorite song to come on the radio. You waited for photos to be developed. You waited for a friend to show up at the agreed time because once you left the house, you were unreachable. Waiting wasn't torture. It was normal. And inside that waiting, something formed. Patience, tolerance for uncertainty, the muscle of delayed gratification. You learned that not everything arrives on demand. You learned that anticipation is part of experience, not an obstacle to it. Your social world was physical. Conflict happened face to face. If you argued with a friend, you saw their expression change. You heard the shift in their tone. You felt the weight of silence. Repair happened in person, not through a block button. You learned to read a room before you ever read a thread. You learned that discomfort is something you move through, not something you exit immediately. These were not lessons you consciously studied. They were embedded in daily life. Then, something happened. And it happened fast. The internet arrived not as a background condition, but as an event. You remember the sound of a modem connecting. You remember building your first email address. You remember chat rooms that felt experimental, almost secret. The internet was a place you went. You logged on, and just as importantly, you logged off. There was a boundary. School existed in one world. The digital world existed in another. Crossing between them felt deliberate. This is where the psychology of the Xennial becomes distinct. You were old enough to remember the before, and young enough to master the after. That combination created a kind of technological bilingualism. You speak analog and digital fluently. You understand physical presence, eye contact, and shared silence. You also understand usernames, typed tone, and curated identity. But here's the subtle cost. Belonging is harder when you are fluent in two worlds but native to neither. Identity usually forms from belonging to a generational story. Gen X shares analog detachment. Millennials share digital immersion. Gen Z shares algorithmic fluency. But Xennials, You are transitional. You are what it looks like when one era closes and another loads. You were told you were Gen X, yet you didn't fully share their hardened skepticism, formed entirely offline. Later, you were grouped with millennials, yet you never felt completely at home in the always online environment that shaped them from childhood. So you adapted. You learned to move between spaces without fully claiming either. This creates a subtle psychological pattern. You become good at translating. At work, you can understand older colleagues who value structure and hierarchy. You can also understand younger colleagues who value speed and flexibility. You can explain to one side why constant notifications fragment attention. You can explain to the other why trust still requires time. You become connective tissue, but connective tissue is rarely noticed. It carries weight quietly. Historical timing intensified this pattern. Your childhood unfolded in the long, bright afterglow of the 1990s, a decade that felt, in hindsight, remarkably stable. The cultural narrative was simple: study hard, go to college, build a life that will be safer and wider than the one before. You believed it, because children are supposed to believe that the world will hold. But just as you reached adulthood, the dot-com bubble burst. Careers that seemed inevitable dissolved. Stability felt provisional. Then came September 11th. For older generations, it disrupted established life. For you, it struck at launch. The age of first jobs, first apartments, first independent plans. The psychological message was immediate. The world can change overnight, and progress does not guarantee safety. And just as recovery seemed possible, the 2008 financial crisis arrived when many of you were approaching traditional milestones. Buying homes, forming families, consolidating careers. Again, the ground shifted. These stacked disruptions created something distinctive, a blend of optimism and caution. You still believe in effort. You still carry the hope you were raised with. But beneath that hope runs a steady awareness that systems break. You plan carefully. You expect change. You scan for exits. Not because you are cynical, but because your timing taught you that stability is conditional. There is another layer. You remember when work ended. When the office was a place, not a condition. When being unreachable was ordinary. Then smartphones dissolved the last boundary. Email followed you home. Notifications followed you into bed. The day lost its perimeter. You adapted, of course. But part of your nervous system still expects intervals. Pauses. Offline stretches. You remember what it felt like to be absent from the network. And that memory never fully disappears. Now you are raising children inside a world that has no such boundary. Their friendships extend through devices. Their mistakes can persist. Their childhood is partially archived. You remember unsupervised bikes and unstructured afternoons. You try to preserve fragments of that world for them. But you know it cannot be recreated intact. You are parenting across realities, translating risks your parents never had to imagine. And in the middle of this, you often feel structurally in between, supporting aging parents above, supporting children below, building careers and systems that shifted under your feet. There is a particular kind of fatigue that comes from standing in the middle of multiple timelines at once. Not collapse, but continuous load. You hold memory and adaptation simultaneously. Yet there is strength here, because you remember silence. You remember waiting. You remember when attention was not monetized. You were among the last adults whose inner life formed without constant observation. You know how to tolerate stillness without panic. You know how to imagine without input. You know what it feels like to log off. In a world accelerating toward perpetual connectivity, that memory is not trivial, it is resource. You are not simply between generations. You are continuity between eras. You did not miss the future, and you did not lose the past. You carry both, and carrying both is not confusion. It is cognitive flexibility shaped by transition. The psychology of the Xennial is not about nostalgia. It is about adaptation under acceleration. It is about forming identity in one architecture and performing adulthood in another. It is about remembering that reality once had edges and quietly feeling their absence. And perhaps the reason you sometimes feel like you don't fully fit is not because you are misaligned, but because you are the hinge itself. The bridge is never fully one side or the other. It exists to connect, and that, whether celebrated or not, is its own kind of belonging. And for more such videos, subscribe and comment your thoughts.